Hi, this is Sean, and this channel is called Wolf Dog Moon. Today we're going to be doing an in-depth review of the 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. If you like this kind of content, smash that like button. Subscribe to our channel, ring the bell for notifications so you don't miss out on our next video, and comment down below. Let us know what you think, and we can start a discussion and a community of like-minded people on a friendly and inviting environment and channel. Alright, let's get into this. Okay, so we're going to be looking at the 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. And first, before I begin, what I'd like to do is I'm showing you the 3 core books that you need to play the game. So you have the Player's Handbook. So I'm just going to slide this over with this. And you have the Player's Handbook, and then you have the Monsters Manual. So the Monster Manual would be for the Dungeon Master, but I bet a lot of times the players, even though technically they're not supposed to, a lot of people will buy all the manuals, so they'll get the Monster Manual for their collection. And then you got the Dungeon Master's Guide, which again is supposed to only be for the Dungeon Master, but a lot of times, like I said before, if you're into Dungeons & Dragons, at some point you're probably going to want to take a stab at being a Dungeon Master. Not everybody has the talents or the mindset to take on the role of the Dungeon Master. Some people I found that are, in all my years of playing, I've been playing almost since the beginning of Dungeons & Dragons. But I found that some people are really good at playing as one of the player characters, and then other people are really good at being the Dungeon Master. And usually it's 2 different types of people in terms of mindset, but there's always going to be people in the middle that can do a little of both. I've been the Dungeon Master for campaigns, and I've been a player character, and I usually prefer to be a player character. But a lot of times, and many people find this maybe with this type of hobby, that you have to take on the role of getting other people into this hobby, and so that means that you have to introduce them to this fun game, but you have to do it usually through creating the scenarios and the adventures for your friends or colleagues or people that you want to bring into this hobby. So you end up having to be the Dungeon Master, or maybe you wanted to be a player. So just to get into my history with Dungeons & Dragons, I've been playing Dungeons & Dragons on and off. I started way back in when the Red Box edition came out. So this was the player's manual for the Red Box set. So back when I was in middle school, one of my friends had this manual, and we were on a winter, we couldn't go outside for recess, so he let me use this manual, and I went through the opening mission by myself and just kind of pretended to roll dice and use my imagination to go on an adventure. And then I kind of told my brother about it and my cousin, and next thing you know, they were excited, and then we were playing Dungeons & Dragons. So that's my history. I predominantly played, here's the edition of Dungeons & Dragons that I played growing up. We went from that Red Box version of Dungeons & Dragons into what was called Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. So there was kind of 2 separate philosophies that goes back to the beginning of Dungeons & Dragons with Gary Gygax. There was the group at TSR, I think, that wanted to do more advanced Dungeons & Dragons, or they wanted to do more tactical battle systems and more intricate, mappings of the battles. So the focus would be on the battle mechanics, kind of like the games like Warhammer or whatever, as opposed to the role-playing aspect, where the other camp that was at TSR wanted to focus more on the role-playing. So you ended up with two lines, which was the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and then you ended up with the other line, which was called the White Box. It originally came out as a box set, I think, and then that includes the Red Box later. So they had a, Red Box took you through a certain number of levels as a player, and then there was I think a blue box, a green box, and a black box. Black box would take you up to the high levels as a player character. So that's my history. I've played every edition of Dungeons and Dragons, including first edition, Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Played second edition, third edition. The only edition I never played was fourth edition, and so the reason why I never played fourth edition, and that will tie into some of my review here, is that for me the fourth edition was where, I think Wizards of the Coast, they had put out third edition or part of third edition or one of the updates, 3.5, and so when they got to fourth edition, they decided to go in a direction that was more mimicking video games such as World of Warcraft and some board games, and so they were using sort of video game design philosophy mixed with board game design philosophy, and they basically created something that was not really Dungeons and Dragons. It just had the Dungeons and Dragons logo, and so I skipped over 4th edition, and that's when I went retro, where I went back to a lot of the original stuff like the 2nd edition, and then also some of, because when Wizards of the Coast came out with the 4th edition Dungeons and Dragons, it created a problem, I think, with the secondary or third party developers of source materials and supplements. They were kind of left in the lurch, and so that's when Wizards of the Coast created the open gaming license, and that's what ended up spawning things such as Pathfinder, Castles and Crusaders, Basic Fantasy, and many other systems. Lamentations of the Flame Princess. There's a lot of different systems that use the D20 that harken back to more of a retro feel of the game. So for this review not to be too long-winded, let's get into the 5th edition. We'll start with the Player's Handbook. Now, one thing I would say, one caveat with that right off the bat, I would say with the 5th edition, is the 4th edition wasn't doing well, and Pathfinder was getting to a point where it had supplanted Dungeons and Dragons as the go-to system and books to use for Dungeons and Dragons style role-playing games. So it supplanted Dungeons and Dragons. So that left Wizards of the Coast with a problem. The 4th edition, although it brought in a lot of new mechanics and ideas, overall it wasn't as successful and ubiquitous as they thought it was going to be or hoped it was going to be. So when they made their move to go to the 5th edition, they did an open play test. So they took a lot of community feedback, and so they had a lot of testing and different ideas that ended up culminating in this 5th edition. So 5th edition kind of became, in some ways it's going to be a little bit stymied right from the word jump, because it's trying to do something different and better, but also incorporate some of all the other editions. And so you overall you end up with a somewhat of a Frankenstein's monster with this edition of Dungeons and Dragons, the 5th edition. You end up with some good things and then some of the wonkier or some of the contradictory philosophies that kind of muddled the 4th edition. They end up in here too, and I'll show you some examples of that. So you get a lot of people, instead of one visionary group that's working on this, they got a lot of outside input, and it culminates in something that is a little bit too homogenous and a little bit too hand holding. And also there are aspects to this that it has the tendency to tell you what you can't do rather than what you can do as a player, and I'll show you examples of that as well. But what you get with the 5th edition is you get a huge corporation that's backing and pushing this, and they've made a huge marketing push. They've brought in celebrities and pseudo celebrities to really push this version of the game in order to bring it back to prominence. And so let me just show you the back of this book. So what you get as a result is high production values. You get color artwork, you get these shiny hardcover books, and you get lots of style, like graphic design, and there's a lot of production that is going into this. And to me, they're using a lot of Magic the Gathering artists in this, so you get kind of a homogeneous style similar to their Magic the Gathering line, which in some ways it's a good thing, but it's also a bad thing because all their product offerings start to look the same. Whereas what's cool about Dungeons and Dragons is it harkens back to an older time and more Tolkien, where Magic the Gathering can kind of go in all kinds of different directions in terms of the different you got pirates and dinosaurs, you have fairy tales, and then you have dragons, and you have dragons and dinosaurs, but a dragon is a more fanciful, why would there be dinosaurs if there's dragons? Dragons can fly, and so you start to get, with Magic the Gathering, you get this kind of all over the place, every type of genre mashed together, and different fantasies and different ideas of the settings, and that's leaking its way into Dungeons and Dragons, unfortunately. And so the other thing that you get with the high production value and all that marketing is you get a pretty hefty price tag. You get a suggested retail price of $49.95, and Canada $58 for essentially just to play Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, that is a pretty hefty sticker price. Now, I was able to get these books off of Amazon, and so I would check something like Amazon around the holidays. I was able to get these books like 50% or more off. So I paid in the low $20 and even below $20 for some of these books. And so that's the way I would go if I was to try to get these books. And unlike some of the other previous reviews I've done, I did a basic fantasy review, I did a Savage Worlds review. I encourage you to check out those reviews, because unlike those, the sticker price for these is definitely a sticking point, because it's quite the hurdle. And also, in addition to that, those books are all in one. You get everything you need to play in one book. But with this is only the player's handbook. So you still need the dungeon guide and the monster, the monster guide or bestiary or whatever they call it, just to start playing. And I remember when I was in middle school, me and my brother and my cousins, we all pooled our money in order to get the player's handbook and then and the dungeon master guide. And then I think the monster guide wasn't ready, it came out later, and we just used the ones from the red box because we had the red box version of Dungeons and Dragons until we could get our hands on the monster guide. So with the high production and the big corporation that's behind this, you get a big sticker price. And then some of the issues that I have with this, now the 5th edition has the popularity of the brand name and the recognizable nature of the Dungeons and Dragons label and the brand. And so when people hear about role playing and they go to especially if you go to like Barnes and Noble, they really support this. And so it's a recognizable name. I mean, they've put out movies for Dungeons and Dragons. There was even a TV cartoon back in the 80s or the 90s. And so this has a long history behind it. So it does some good things in here, such as the like if you have an advantage or disadvantage, that's an interesting change to the mechanics to try to resolve some issues with imbalances with the different situations that you get into when you're playing, so that you don't have to necessarily do as many house rules or whatever. Like 2nd edition was really good once you did certain house rules to it, but the disadvantage and advantage, it's a neat concept, but it also has the drawback of one of the things that I feel hurts this particular edition is your stats should take a lot of the aspects of it, like the stats that you have, your ability scores, and then the bonuses and modifiers that you have should take care of a lot of the mechanics so that you can focus as a player on the role playing and creating a character that is unique. And there are a lot of gimmicks in this 5th edition, and I'll show you examples of that. But first, let me show you some of the other books that you have to get in order to use the 5th edition. So move this aside. So you need the Dungeon Master Guide. It's another nice shiny. First, let me step back 1 second. Actually, you know what? Scratch that. I'll continue. So we got the Dungeon Master Guide here. Another pretty shiny book with a very shiny sticker price. A suggested retail price of $49.95. So you get high. I'm going to take you into here. You get high production value. So you get shaded areas. You get modeled, textured paper. You get awesome color artwork. Sometimes it suffers a little bit from looking like Magic the Gathering rather than Dungeons and Dragons having its own unique style and feel. It starts to become kind of homogeneous, but you get some awesome color artwork, but with that you get a pretty hefty price tag. Hold on 1 second, please. And then here's the monster manual, which you get, again, you get high production value, descriptions of the monsters, and you get some pretty cool artwork in here and stuff. But again, you get a pretty hefty price. So this feels like a premium way to play Dungeons and Dragons, and that's one of its detractions. And then what's cool about the system though is it's well supported. Like, I have this book, The Curse of Strahd, which is kind of a reimagining or just a remake of Ravenloft. And then they have the adventure books, Tales from the Yawning Portal, which are cool. And then you got Xanther's Guide to Everything. Now this, some of this, like a book like this, has extra, I think this is the one that has new character archetypes and new, like I think for example, one of the things that I was excited about was, I always want to play a samurai warrior, and I think one of these supplements had, like, you know, what you could do to be a samurai warrior. I was a little disappointed with it though, because it was a bit gimmicky. Like, you should just be able to create a samurai warrior using the regular player's manual, the core player's book. It's, you know, a samurai is just a distinctive Asian style warrior with the Asian philosophy, and also a samurai sword, a katana. So they could just offer a katana in the original book, and you're a fighter, and here it is right here. So we have like the samurai archetype, but it's you get this book. This is one of my criticisms of 5th edition. You get it. There's a lot of monetization and a lot of gimmicks to get you to get these other books. You feel like if you don't get them, that you're going to be missing out on something, but you're really just getting heavy monetization. And but then you get these shiny hardcover books and stuff. So there is that. And then I have Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes. So a lot of these books too, one of the problems I have with some of these books too is that in some of the direction that the company has gone in, I would compare it to the video game industry right now, where they're doing The Last of Us for the PlayStation 5, like The Last of Us Chapter 1 remake, and the game has already been remastered for the PlayStation 4, and it originally came out on the PlayStation 3. Well, they're doing the same thing with the Dungeons and Dragons. They're just using the old books from 2nd edition and just doing them again, instead of coming up with new creative like not necessarily environments, but some new storylines or new creative directions. You know, like the Curse of Strahd is just Ravenloft, and then they have, like, this is Waterdeep. So they have the Waterdeep, where they also are incorporating some of the R.A. Salvatore characters, because those books were so good back in the day. So they're using, like, Jarlaxle, and, you know, Dritz Dwarden shows up, and, you know, they're talking about Bruenor Battlehammer. Well, those are awesome books, but we need new stuff, new creativity, not just repackaged the same stuff, repackaged all over again, just with a new skin and a new coat of paint, but it's the same skin as before. If you're going to call this 5th edition and it's supposed to be a new edition, then it should feel like it's its own thing and come up with some awesome inspired new settings, rather than using Menzoberranzan and all in the Forgotten Realms. But now everything is the Forgotten Realms. Well, in the past, and they're in Dragonlance. I mean, there was back in the second edition. There was Dragonlance. There was, I think, Birthright. There was several other. There was what was that system? Gray something? Gray. I forget what it's called off the top of my head. But if you know, comment down below. But there was like it started with the word gray. And we only played a couple adventures in that one because that one was kind of so, it was so wild and crazy, what kind of things that you could get into and what kind of trouble and traps and stuff. So we didn't like that one as much as some of like the mountain of what was that box set called? What was it? Anyways, I'm rambling a little bit, and this review is getting a little bit long in the tooth. But keep in mind, Dungeons and Dragons originally was TSR. The company was called TSR, not Wizards of the Coast. So the Wizards of the Coast are the new masters of this system and the brand itself. And so you have to keep that in mind while you're looking at this kind of thing. And then this has a bit of mainstream popularity, again because of the marketing, and you have a lot of celebrities, and you have shows like Critical Role, where they're, in my opinion, they're actually playing Pathfinder with a 5th edition skin over it. I think that's what they originally played before they did that Critical Role show. But you have shows like that that are bringing it kind of a mainstream attention. But let's get towards wrapping this up. So I'm going to get back to the core player's handbook, and I'll take you through that and show you some of the things that I alluded to earlier. And so just give me 1 second, please. All right, so here we are again at the player's handbook, and this is a cool cover. One thing that bothers me a little bit about it is I would rather just see a dragon and a warrior fighting a dragon rather than this giant and wearing some kind of like dragon skin. Again, I think with 5th edition they were trying to reassert themselves, Wizards of the Coast, as like the de facto Dungeons and Dragons style with the 5th edition, because again they had deviated so much with 4th edition, it incorporating video game philosophy in terms of design and also board game design philosophy, and then trying to mesh that with role-playing game design philosophy. It created a bit of a Frankenstein monster. And then but unfortunately with this one you have some of those leftover bits in here, so you end up with a little bit of a homogeneous Frankenstein's monster with this. So let me just take you in. You do get great artwork in this, and the setup is interesting. They used Bruno Battlehammer character from the Forgotten Realms by R.A. Salvatore to kind of show you a step-by-step to create a character. It's kind of funny and whimsical in a way. It's a little bit cute. A little bit too cute. Like, he's just a quintessential dwarven character. So it's a little, this whole section feels a bit redundant. But overall, this is a pretty good version of Dungeons and Dragons. I think that they hit a sweet spot somewhere between 2nd edition and 3rd edition, like the 2nd edition rules encyclopedia, and then like the 3rd edition up to like maybe like the 3.5 edition was where that was where they peaked, in my opinion. And then this is an attempt to try to get back to the glory days a little bit, and I feel it falls short in certain ways. So let me skip ahead and show you some of the things that, and overall I would say that if you can afford to get these books and play this is the Dungeons and Dragons that everybody might be playing, in terms of if you're looking to go to a game store, or you're looking to it's a recognizable brand, and it's got the support of Hasbro, and they own Wizards of the Coast, so you get a lot of marketing and stuff. So this is the current thing, and a lot of people who have never played role-playing games have heard of Dungeons and Dragons, and so it might be easier to convince someone, like one of your friends who has never played a role-playing game before, to try Dungeons and Dragons. But you also got to keep in mind that Dungeons and Dragons has its own stigma, so there are good things and bad things about the brand name and its associations. And this book tries to, a little too hard sometimes, to try to break the mold in terms of some of those stigmas. You're always going to have, just like with video games and stuff, you're going to have certain stigmas that are going to be just like even country music. Like my wife was saying to me earlier that all country music sounds the same, which is not true. You have to listen to it and be open to hearing it. It's kind of, that's a generic thing to say. And similarly, Dungeons and Dragons has its own stigmas like that, where it's only for nerds, or it's only for such and such a person, which is not true. It can be for anybody. But this edition, I would say, is expensive. I would use that as a caveat to judge this version of the game. And so another thing I would point out too, and hold on one second please. Okay, so here let's take a look at the fighter. The fighter is the workhorse of Dungeons and Dragons. The fighter is the workhorse of any party, because the fighter is designed, and should be designed, in such a way where he's leading the party at the front, and he's going to take the brunt of the monster's charges, and he's going to be dealing with the enemies and inflicting as much damage as possible, and just being a workhorse. Now, in this edition, it tends, instead of just letting the stats dictate and allow you to play, focus on role playing, and as you're playing, this tends to hold your hand in a way, and it creates a situational style of play where you have to, again, the fighter is the generic workhorse class. It's, everyone knows of the knight that takes on the dragon, even outside of Dungeons and Dragons. You have movies like Highlander, you have movies like Krull, you have all kinds of movies, Conan, where it's a fighter, it's a person fighting. Everyone understands that, so you don't have to know anything about Dungeons and Dragons to know what a fighter is. It's the quintessential warrior, and that class is going to be, you should always have at least one or two warriors in your party, or fighters. They call it fighters in this. But this really holds your hand. It tells you what, it gives you an example of a quick build, and it tells you to pick the soldier background. And then it goes on over here, and I've also detailed this in another review I would check out called Basic Fantasy. It's on our channel, and I encourage you to take a look at that version of Dungeons and Dragons style role-playing games. I think you'll enjoy it, and you'll learn a lot, and it'll also help you understand what I'm trying to get at with this 5th edition. So here you got skills you can choose, and it tells you what skills to choose. And it also, going down here, you have to choose a fighting style, where if you're a warrior or a fighter, you have the strength and the dexterity to use archery, and you can defend and dueling and all these different things that this tries to, in a gimmicky way, it tries to separate those things apart from what you actually are. If you're a great athlete, like a warrior or a fighter is going to be a great athlete, and that should be reflected in the stats when you create your character, and that way you can focus on role playing. It's like some of these things, it says choose, you adopt a particular style of fighting as your specialty, choose one of the following options. You can't take a fighting style option more than once, even if you later get to choose again. So it's stymieing your creativity as a player. You have to choose, even though it's trying to make it seem like it's doing the opposite. This is actually stymieing you, and these are so situational. A flat bonus is always going to be better than any of these things that they do for this fighter, for example. And again, this is the workhorse of the system, the fighter. And so a flat bonus does show that you can do all these other things. So if you have a +1 bonus to hit, that's every time you roll the dice. So you can defend, you can do archery, you can do all these things without having to choose one of these things. And then, for example, they have Action Surge, which feels like from a board game or a video game. It's like something that you would have in like a Dragon Age or one of those video games. And I think this is a leftover bit from 4th edition. 4th edition, I think Action Surge was used everywhere in the book. And so it starts to not feel like a role-playing game. It starts to feel like you're trying to imitate a video game. And then you have these martial archetypes where you have to choose, okay, I'm going to be a champion, I'm going to be a battle master, and then you're going to use superiority dice. It starts to overcomplicate in its attempt to give you options, but they're kind of like the illusion of choice. They're all situational, whereas just the bonus to hit, it seems too boring. And a bonus to hit and a bonus to damage to a fighter is what makes you an awesome fighter, because it's every time you roll. You're going to be the workhorse. You having to, I'm out of superiority dice, so I can't do the maneuver I wanted to do. That's kind of silly. It's like a fighter that's this is acting like a wizard or something, where now you're using spell slots, and you, like a video game, you can only use so many slots. And then, hold on one second, please. Okay, and then over here you have maneuvers, where they're giving you all these options that none of them are as good as just a flat +1, +2, +3, +4, +5 bonus to your hit or to damage. You got Commander Strike, which is super situational, disarming attack. And so you're telling the Dungeon Master, I'm going to do Distracting Strike. I'm going to do a riposte. It's kind of silly. Rather than you just focusing on role playing, and you're going to do this badass move because the dice are going to work in your favor because of all these bonuses that you have, because you're an awesome fighter. That's, as you level up, you're getting bonuses and stuff. And I mean, they even have spell casting. I guess that's if you're going to be an Eldritch Knight. But it's starting to overcomplicate things, where some of these, the player that's been playing Dungeons and Dragons is going to be able to cherry pick these different, for example, these maneuvers, and figure out which ones give the flat bonuses. And then somebody else who hasn't played before, they might pick something that ends up being so situational that they're rarely using it, and if they do, it's not very effective. And then the guy that knows how to play, he knows to choose the flat bonuses. So, and the rest of this version of the game tends to suffer from a level of hand holding like that, where you're going to want to create a character, and the Dungeon Master might tell you what you can't do, or you can't do that. Like, what if I want to create a character like Rurouni Kenshin in here, and I want to do that by being a pure fighter? And they might say, oh, you have to be a monk in order to be a Rurouni Kenshin. But I just want to be able to use a katana. and then be an awesome fighter. I don't want to choose the monk. And then in here they also have, I think, feats that they try to put in here, which is left over from 3rd edition. And so what you tend to have with the 5th edition is a little bit of homogeneous feel to the system. You end up with a bit of a Frankenstein's monster, because, getting to my final thoughts, because you're trying to please so many different people, and people that don't play Dungeons and Dragons, and people that aren't interested in Dungeons and Dragons. So you're trying to, all these people are watching Game of Thrones, so let's throw in Game of Thrones stuff. They're throwing everything in to try to get people, without carefully considering what you end up at the end. But by doing so, what you do end up with is kind of a Frankenstein's monster, and you end up with a homogeneous feel where everybody gets the same proficiency bonus regardless of what class you choose, and regardless of what makes sense logically. For example, a fighter is going to progress through strength, inherent skills of strength and speed and dexterity, and so it wouldn't be the same as like a wizard, which has to do years of study and years of apprenticeship and practice before they could cast a spell. So that's why you get older looking characters as an archetype for like a wizard, because it's something that you have to study, the arcane or something. You have to study in depth, and be an apprentice takes years to study, where a fighter can rely on inherent strengths of, building up their muscles and practicing with the sword. But you can be very athletic and compensate for not being a master, and then this tends to have a lot of generic aspects to it as a result, such as, I'm a battle master, so you're no different than the other guy that you're playing with. He also chose the battle master path, and you chose the champion path, but somebody else chose the champion path in the same background. Like, this has backgrounds in it where people are going to choose similar backgrounds. Some are a lot better than others, so you end up with kind of the system itself has elements, and in further on, if you know what you're doing and you've played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons and the other versions and the other editions, you know how to use optional rules. You know how to use alternate systems in here, and this does give you the ability to do that further on in the book. Like, you can incorporate the feats that were popular in 3.5 edition, and also something like Pathfinder. The feats were really popular, so you can incorporate stuff like that here, but you have to have been a seasoned player of Dungeons and Dragons. So the new player is going to be thrown into this, and in their attempts to please everybody, they've created a kind of overly complicated, homogeneous, and sometimes cumbersome system, where there's a lot of bits in it that aren't as logical as they could be. But with that, with this version, you get the Wizards of the Coast company and Hasbro, their big marketing push. So this is the current version. It's the shiny thing that if people are playing Dungeons and Dragons, this is what they're playing. Or if you go to a local game store, they're going to be, because again, it's promoted in turn for sales through the game stores, your local game stores. So this is what they're going to offer predominantly, is the 5th edition. But that doesn't say whether or not this is the best version to play. It's the current version. So my final thoughts are, with this you get a fun version of Dungeons and Dragons. Although it may not be the best version of Dungeons and Dragons, there's enough in here and enough supplementary material, such as the ones that I showed you, that you can be having some awesome adventures for a long time. On the downside, this comes with a hefty sticker price with a lot of monetization, a lot of gimmicks, and also a lot of retreads. They're using older versions of the settings like Waterdeep and Ravenloft, and they're just repackaging them and remastering them, so to speak, like they do with like some of the video games like The Last of Us. So you're just getting a shiny new skin on an old thing, but they're not giving you as much value as you would get from some of those older systems. So overall, I would recommend this for someone who wants to be part of this new wave of the Dungeons and Dragons style role-playing, but I would caution them in terms of the price tag. So I hope this review helps you, and I hope that this video finds you having an amazing day. Comment down below if you don't agree with some of my comments, and let's get a discussion. But in the meantime, I hope you have a blessed day,